Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in a moment, just giving people a little bit of time to flow into the proverbial Zoom room. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Can Small Employers Improve Retention and Productivity Through Improving Employee Financial Health? This is the fourth webinar in a series of conversations that Reimagine Main Street and the U.S. Department of Commerce are organizing on the critical topic of job quality and good jobs from the vantage point of small businesses and small and mid-sized employers. I am Tammy Halevi. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of our team at Reimagine Main Street, a project of the Public-Private Strategies Institute. I'd like to take a minute to thank my colleagues, James West and Ashley Powdar, for all of their work to produce this webinar. So Reimagine Main Street is focused on advancing equitable growth for small businesses and the people they employ on MLK Boulevards, Cesar Chavez Ways, Chinatowns, and main streets across the nation. This initiative is built around a multi-stakeholder cross-sector network, surveys, and engagement with small business owners to ensure that your voices are always centered, and meetings and events like this one to engage in dialogue on critical and timely topics. Before we dive into the meat of the conversation, I want to thank all of the partners who helped reach the hundreds of business owners who are on the line and who are deep in this important work. Please join me in expressing our deep, deep gratitude to all of the partners. So, why are we here talking about good jobs and small employers? And why does it make sense for you all to take the time to tune in? We've joined forces with the fantastic team at the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Baldrige Center and others on this topic for three reasons. First, small businesses, particularly businesses with fewer than 100 employees, represent about half of the U.S. labor market. These businesses matter. You all matter. Second, for employers, job quality can be a significant source of competitive advantage. Churn has consequences, especially in a tight labor market, and strong job quality can reduce employee turnover and strengthen the operational efficiency and competitiveness of a company. And finally, nobody on this call needs to be reminded that small employers are qualitatively different than large employers. There's a reason that CEO might actually mean chief everything officer in a small firm. And we recognize that where large employers can assign an entire department or create a task force to solve for elements of job quality, that's just not the reality for small employers. And so now that you know our why, I am delighted to welcome Dave Langdon, the Deputy Director of Policy and Strategic Planning at the U.S. Department of Commerce, to offer his welcome on behalf of the department. Dave is an extraordinary leader shepherding the Good Jobs Toolkit through the Department of Commerce in collaboration with Department of Labor from its inception when it was just an idea, and since then collaborating with us to make these sessions as valuable as possible. Thank you, Dave, for being a great partner and for your leadership on this critical topic more broadly. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tammy, for the warm introduction and for Public-Private Strategies partnership on bringing the story of good jobs to the small business community. We share the view that good jobs are the foundation of an equitable economy. It lifts up all workers and families and also makes businesses more competitive globally. And I'm sure that everybody here in today's webinar, including all the small business leaders especially, recognize that providing good jobs and makes them an employer of choice and creates a clear competitive advantage when it comes to recruitment, retention, and basically executing their mission. The Departments of Commerce and Labor partnered in this administration to sort of lay out a vision of what comprises a good job through a good set of good jobs principles and a job quality toolkit that you'll be learning about today. This is set across 8 principles that create a framework for businesses, labor unions, and others to have a shared vision of job quality. Part of that vision is recognizing that true quality jobs don't just pay well, but they fulfill workers by bringing greater security to their lives and their families. And that's a spirit of really of what we're going to be talking about today with respect to financial health of workers and those aspects of the job quality toolkit. I'm very excited that Dr. Kelly Welsh from the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, will be presenting to you, giving you an overview of the job quality toolkit, and then and sort of an introduction to how that presents some strategies around financial health of workers. Dr. Welsh has been a longtime member of the Baldrige program and has a long experience both working with academia, nonprofits, and the federal government on issues related to organizational psychology. And we're very excited for her partnership and leadership in developing the job quality toolkit. So she's a fantastic speaker. I look forward to hearing from her now. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for the warm remarks. I appreciate it. Fantastic. I feel like a high bar has been set for me. Thanks for having me today, Tammy, and folks from PPSI, and James for getting the slides ready for me. If you could go to the next slide. So I'm here to tell you about the story of the Job Quality Toolkit and its assessment and why we came about developing it. James, if you could go to the next slide. So the Department of Commerce has been for quite a while now looking and trying to feel the pulse of the U.S. economy. It makes sense. That's what its job is in many ways. And for many years, even before the pandemic, there was a rising in what we would say was a dissatisfaction with jobs in the United States. And essentially that rise also sort of paralleled and marked the lowering of our middle class segment and the increase in the number of low quality jobs that were making up a larger portion of our economic picture. A lot of those jobs being service industry jobs or low wage jobs or hourly jobs. And so you see here that there's more than 53 million people who are earning low wages and are working for small to medium-sized businesses, which may or may not be your business. And not all of those jobs necessarily have to be low quality jobs. But the United States definitely has a job quality problem. So James, if you could go to the next slide. Pay is not the only thing, and it's not necessarily the most important thing to everyone when it comes to a job having quality. There can be lots of reasons or lots of needs that are being met that make a person stay in a job that might be what we would consider low wage or hourly work. It's really about meeting the person or the wage or the workforce where they are. That's kind of the real key here. And we'll be revisiting that theme several times throughout this small part of my discussion. We know that the demand for workers is high right now, and that is an unusual time. We know that being an employer of choice is now a challenge for many employers that maybe they've never really faced before in the past. Maybe it was always about getting to choose the cream of the crop. And now we know that there are at least 2 million manufacturing jobs that are going unfilled and will be as many as 4 million jobs in the coming future. So the world and the demand and the need, they've all changed rapidly in the past few years. James, if you could go to the next slide. So what does it take to have or increase the quality of a job that you might be offering to some of your employees? Maybe you only have 7 employees or you have 2,000 employees, but human beings have basic needs. And so this is what they call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You don't need to understand it, but as a human being, I'm sure you will get the notion of having physical security being the most basic need that needs to be met in order for you to meet your day and not be distracted. It's very hard to care about actualizing your higher self if your stomach is growling. So there's this order of operations that happens for all of us, where if you can't get your rent paid, or you can't feed your kids, or you can't keep your electricity on, those are very distracting and stressful things. So having those basic needs met is really important. And while that's not your responsibility necessarily as an employer to create the wage that makes all of those things happen, there are levers that you can push and pull that you may not know about that could actually affect those parts of that person's life. So hopefully we're going to sort of perk your ears up and get you curious enough to investigate more after today's talk. So control and belonging. We know now, based on our job quality toolkit assessments of employers, they will self-report that they don't do such a great job of creating a sense of belonging in the workplace. Interestingly enough, an individual who decides to quit their job within 4 months of starting usually decides that very early on, as soon as they're onboarding. You show up, or even an interview in some ways, where they start compiling a picture of your organization. If they roll into your place of business and your parking lot looks terrible, or your bathrooms look like a scene out of a horror movie, those are all things that contribute to someone's decision to stay and feel like they're valued by you. We communicate messages like that implicitly in a million different ways. And so those are the kinds of things that you can certainly affect, that really do affect someone's sense of belonging. Is there training in their job? There's lots of different things that we can talk about that affect belonging. This notion of mastery is the sense of, do I know how to do what I need to do? And the most basic thing that you have control over with that is job training. One of the things that employers have self-reported to us through our job quality toolkit assessment, and this is almost 100 employers now, it's been surprising, but they'll say, yeah, we don't do training on the job. We hire them with the skills. We do an interview and we assume that they know how to do the job. That's why we hired them. Well, the reality is there's all kinds of things that are involved in the workflow of jobs that you have for folks that might not just be the tools that are being used. It's where to use them, when to use them, even maybe how in certain contexts. So job training, just basic job skill training, is something to be assured of. Or things like, did your job description actually match the job that was there, and it's not one that you posted from 1996 that's like photocopied and kind of off to the side in the reprint? Actual things that have happened. So two of the biggest predictors of someone's motivation to do something, all humans in almost all contexts, are mastery and control. Do I know how to do what I need or want to do? And can I do, and do I have control over doing what I need and want to do? So these notions of, the idea that pay is the biggest predictor of job quality or satisfaction, scheduling can be just as important. So if you can offer ways in which scheduling is a negotiable, you could be increasing someone's job quality that way. So the goal, we know, is that we want to attract and make workers want to stay. James, can you switch to the next slide? So there's multiple pain points that can bring us into the job quality toolkit as a potential solution for you as a small to medium-sized employer. It could be that you're looking to attract talent, keep your talent, or essentially train the next in line for the talent. And the reality is those are all different strategic goals that you might take on in your organization, but they don't all have to happen at once. Attracting and keeping talent is something that benefits, or the types of benefits that you provide, can really affect in whether you attract that talent and whether you keep that talent. James, can we move to the next slide? And we're going to talk about some of those things today. So as we mentioned, the Department of Commerce built the Job Quality Toolkit with the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program in partnership with the Department of Labor and the White House, and with experts from across the sector of job quality and workforce development. And also, we had, as a part of our build, small to medium-sized manufacturers who gave us feedback on the toolkit. And one of the interesting things that they gave us guidance was to break this up. So don't try and eat the whole enchilada all at once, but to take a certain section and work on it strategically at a time, and that you might want to have an intermediary work with you. What does that mean? A local MEP center, Chamber of Commerce, maybe an alliance, but basically there's lots of help out there for small to medium-sized businesses in their organizational development goals. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. James, if you could go to the next slide. So we mentioned the toolkit. You can find this digitally online at the Department of Commerce or at the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program. We'll have links at the end of the slides or at the end of the whole webinar for you to go find, and you can do some more research. James, next slide. So what is this toolkit? What is going on inside of it? They are strategies to improve worker experience. And there's about 120 plus of them. Do you have to do all of them in order to have a quality job at your organization? No, it might be that you choose or can only choose 4, 12, 20. That's up to you and your workforce. So one of the key parts of the job quality toolkit, and the first things we mentioned in the introduction, is for you as an organization to start having conversations with your workforce about what they need, what their ideas are, how they can contribute to the end of the line, meaning the products themselves. Innovation often starts with the frontline workers who know about the product. It can really help with improving it. So hearing from them isn't just about increasing their experience, because remember that thing about mastery and control? If they're a part of making things better and are a part of having the control of making things better and feel like they're becoming better and better at doing the work, all boats rise with that. So James, can you move to the next slide? So let's talk about what are these drivers of job quality. These drivers were based on research that we had done and from all of those sector experts that are in job quality and in workforce. And these are drivers from the worker's perspective. So essentially benefits that would affect the worker's experience, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility strategies and actions that affect their sense of their workplace, the culture, pay, skills advancement. The rest of those really do make sense. Two big drivers of job quality are job satisfaction and job security. Go this way. And we know that pay can affect those things, but all of these other drivers directly impact those two big things. James, can you move to the next slide? So the job quality toolkit essentially has those 8 drivers, and each of those drivers has like a worksheet that's essentially got several strategies, which would be these things that you see in bold, and actions under each strategy. Here we have only one bullet per strategy in here, but in the actual link that you'll see down there, there's multiple actions that are underneath each of these bulleted items, where you could choose and see, maybe have a conversation with your workforce and see what the best solution set's going to be for you all. One of the things I was shocked to learn, and I was like, oh, it totally makes sense, along the lines of benefits. Well, we're a small business, we try to do a little bit of investment for retirement for our employees, and that's what we do. Well, I was surprised to find out that, let's say, some millennials and maybe Gen Zers out there aren't so interested in having a forced contribution to a 401k program when they feel like they're drowning in debt with student loans. So maybe they would like some help with paying off student loans. So you can see just in that small example that different employees might have different needs, and their needs that you could address. So one of the really important thing about any kind of solution set that you're going to come up with for employees, particularly around benefits, is having the conversation about needs. It doesn't mean that you're obligated to meet all those needs. It just means you want a good fit. Another big key guidance that we would give is measuring benefit uptake. It is very common for businesses to offer benefits that they don't track, and they're literally throwing money away that their employees and they would like to have had a better fit with. So we strongly recommend looking at benefit uptake, because it may be the case you're offering things that are not getting utilized. So next slide. So without further ado, I will stop on the job quality toolkit, and you'll have links to move you forward. And I appreciate the time talking to you today. Thanks.
Kelly, thank you so much for that overview of the Good Jobs Toolkit, or the Job Quality Toolkit, and the recommendations broadly and related to benefits in particular. It is a super valuable resource. It is now my favorite part of any webinar or event. It's when we hear directly from people working every day to help business owners and their employees solve these problems. Today, we are joined by 2 extraordinary thought leaders and entrepreneurs whose companies are innovating to help employers and their workers. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Rachel Schneider, the founder and CEO of Canary, and Srinath Raghunathan, the co-founder and co-CEO of Starlight. I could tell you guys a lot of very impressive things about both Srinath and Rachel and their respective companies, but mostly I'm going to let them do that. What I will tell you is that they are both visionary innovators taking an entirely new approach to financial health challenges. that workers and their employers frequently experience. And today they're going to share some of their insights and a bit about the solutions they've developed. Srinath comes to this work having previously been what I would characterize as a tech guy at Google. And Rachel was a national thought leader on financial health before she took the plunge and started her own company. And so without further delay, let me welcome Rachel and Srinath. Welcome, guys. We're here today to talk about employee financial health and what it means for small employers. And so before we dive into the meat of the conversation, can you help us define financial health, what it is, and why it matters? And Rachel, you're in the upper left-hand box, so I'm going to start with you.
Fantastic. Thanks. And thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I think it is so important, and I'm just delighted to be here. So the way I think about financial health really drives from work that the Financial Health Network has done, which is a nonprofit that works exclusively on this issue and that I worked for about a decade. And when I was there, I led research and we defined financial health really in two directions. We said it means you have the resilience to handle downs in your financial life, and you have the ability to take advantage of ups in your financial life, right? You're able to weather the ups and downs, and you're able to move in an upward trajectory. I still think that idea has real resonance, although in the last few years, Financial Health Network has gone much deeper than that in terms of defining 8 specific criteria, right? So you can go more granular and say financial health means you have sufficient emergency savings and you are not overextended in terms of your credit. You have a reasonable credit score, right? You can come up with a set of indicators. Those indicators always add up to like, do I feel, a lot of fear or some hope? I think then when you take that way of thinking about it to the employer context, you get to add this whole other layer, which is, does my employee have the ability to show up for work? And by show up, I mean not only appear on time, but show up mentally and emotionally for work, or are they experiencing a level of financial stress that gets in the way of them doing that? And I think that's a really important way for employers to think about this.
Super helpful. Srinath, what would you add?
I think Rachel did a great job covering it. So excited to meet everyone. And I think the one thing I would add is I think once someone is facing financial stress and it encounters their day-to-day life, their ability to then refocus and commit to work, show up on time, or do any of the other things becomes so hinged on that financial security and the safety net arriving for them that until we get there, it's kind of almost impossible for me to think about other things if that core sort of safety factor is being triggered in my head.
That totally makes sense. So last year, as part of our work, Reimagine Main Street's work on good jobs, we worked with NORC at the University of Chicago and fielded a survey of thousands of people employed by small and mid-sized firms. And one of the things we learned was that on average, more than 1 in 3 respondents said that they were always or often stressed about their finances. And that rose to more than half of workers in some of the employer segments we identified. And so you've described sort of conceptually, both of you, what are the dimensions of financial health? What are the indicators of financial stress or the absence of financial health that show up at work for employees? And what does that mean for a typical employer? Either of you can start with you, Rachel.
Yeah, the percentage of people who acknowledge in a survey as well that financial stress is impacting their work is also quite high. So I think people are self-aware about this issue. So, consistent with the numbers you're describing, many people will say, I know that I spend several hours at work when I'm supposed to be working, and instead I'm trying to solve some pressing financial issue in my own life. And I think that can show up in ways that are really transparent to employers, like requests for a pay advance, or it can be really opaque. It can be somebody who's routinely late to work and you don't know it's about some financial issue until you start asking a lot of questions, and it turns out that their car is in the shop and they don't have the money to fix it, and they're like struggling to get there on time, right? So there's a lot of ways this can show up.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect that ends up coming up a lot, and we've spent, hundreds of hours here in New York in the last year and a half talking to low-income households about their challenges and their working experiences. And one thing that comes up a lot is people are working, and the hours they're working means that they don't have time to go take care of some of the things that they need to do. And so this juggle of like almost like you need to unblock yourself, but to unblock yourself, you need time, but it's really hard to get out of that loop. And so you hear that a lot. And sometimes if you don't hear it directly, you hear it indirectly because you hear the chatter in the hallways, you hear people talking to each other about taking shifts from each other to go fix the car, like Rachel was mentioning. And so you start hearing these anecdotes. And then one thing that we've seen a lot is when we talk to people who are struggling and need assistance, sometimes there's a bit of shame in coming to the employer asking them. So they might ask each other, a community organizer. And so what's hard is think about the ones who don't have the confidence to ask. So they actually need the help and haven't figured out that they could ask and get support, which the employer is able to give them. But like almost the loudest child is getting support, which is probably like the worst outcome you want as an employer. You want all your awesome employees to get support, not just the ones who spoke up.
No, it's super important. And I think this question of whether and how an employee feels that her employer is the place to turn is a really important one. So if I'm an employer, how might I know or how might I learn that my employees are experiencing financial health challenges? And to your point, Srinath, you probably want to have an understanding of your entire team instead of the one person who may be at this moment experiencing a challenge. How do you all think about that? Why don't we start with you, Srinath?
Absolutely. I think two thoughts, right? One is it's hard. It's a trust building game on one side, which is every manager is trying to build rapport and credence and respect with their community and across generations. You might have different generations participating in your workforce. And so you have to build that relationship, and that's one piece of it. But I think some of it's also a give-get as you build a relationship, whether it's what are you currently offering them that's almost like proactive and self-serve, that they don't need to come and speak to you to get value from you. And is there things you're starting to do that are nudging them to say, oh, I got this perk that I just got emailed or texted, and I can go use that. That will help me. Let me see if I can use that. And that starts to build the trust that you're doing more than just the paycheck for them. And once you start that, I think the journey of what all they might ask you, it's scary but positive because then you built that trust and earned the right to kind of show up for the rest of those questions. But in the absence of that, I think there is behavior. You can probably ask them like, oh, did you get a payday loan? Like what ended up making you want to get that? Like, let's kind of understand where those dynamics are. Or did you need some time to go apply for assistance for taking care of an elder one or someone you care for? And these are the kinds of questions that really mean a lot to the employee, but you might not ever get there. And once you know that, you might find out that, oh, there's actually a program in New York from the Department of Aging that helps you if you're caring for an old one. And it's important, but you have to know that it exists and find out and do it. But it starts with building that trust and offering immediate value in small ways to then get to the deeper understanding with someone you're working with.
I like that. I'm hearing ask your employees questions about what they're experiencing and perhaps ask it in a way that isn't invasive, but that gives you insight. Rachel, what would you add? How do you think about knowing and learning whether employees are experiencing these challenges?
Yeah, so agreed with everything that Srinath just said. And I think what I'd add is that if your employees are lower wage or you are operating in a high cost area, it's a fair assumption your people are experiencing these challenges. And you could start thinking about it from that perspective. And it's also completely the case that many businesses don't have the ability to simply raise wages to respond to the fact that their people are financially fragile. And that's understood, right? But I think that you'll see some things in your population no matter what, right? If you're seeing 401k loans or withdrawals or low participation in the 401k, if you're seeing people ask for pay advances, that is a signal. If you're seeing people distribute GoFundMes amongst themselves, that is a signal. And then I would echo what Srinath said around ask your people and add to that it can be hard for people people feel a lot of shame around not managing their financial life perfectly themselves. And so I'd consider a survey. right? Make it anonymous for people, make it really fast. You don't need a lot of questions. Make it, you know, even like a Google survey that people can answer on their phone will give you some data.
I
And
like
it really be low, you know, low lift for you, low lift for them. And there are questions out there that you could use, whether from Financial Health Network or elsewhere. Just it almost doesn't matter. You're just looking for a barometer.
It's really important. I think you both have nailed it, of course, that's why you're here, but part of it is having the assumption or the insight that this is likely a problem, and then looking for indicators, and then asking kind of basic but not too invasive, telling but not invasive questions. So you all have made it clear that the financial health of workers influences the business performance, and that poor financial health is a damper on the ability of a worker to fully show up and be engaged at work, and that has implications for performance, and that there are ways for an employer to assess and understand needs. So let's talk about what a small employer can reasonably do to help. Each of you represents a really innovative market-based solution to addressing financial health challenges, but you have totally different approaches to offers made to employers. And we love that, because it is meeting folks where they are and with what they need. And so, Rachel, let's start with you. Canary is a benefit that employers can offer. Tell us about your solution for emergency cash, and why focus there, and how does it work?
Sure. So what Canary does is we work with employers to help them set up a charitable fund that it acts as an emergency fund for all of their employers. So the way it works is that the employer donates money to a nonprofit, or the employer can ask employees to donate money to a nonprofit. And that's a nonprofit that we've set up. And then when employees inevitably experience some kind of crisis, maybe that's a health issue or a car that breaks down, and that crisis causes them to not be able to pay for basic living expenses, they can come request assistance, and they'll receive that assistance as a non-taxable payment. It's not income. And the reason I created Canary was that I was doing research and consulting with really large employers. And actually, one of the questions I saw come in from somebody on the webinar was around the idea that small business owners often pay more than larger businesses for the same kinds of things. And in this case, it's the case that large businesses are doing this because they can set up the nonprofit on their own. They can pay the fees to an organization to run this for them. And so they're setting up these emergency funds for their people. By large corporations, I mean Home Depot, Starbucks, Walmart. Like, this is becoming a norm for really large employers. And yet it would be really challenging for a small business owner to take advantage of the efficiency and the tax benefits of how large employers are structuring this. And I think what smaller employers do instead, because I don't think they do nothing. I think when they have employees who experience a crisis, what they do is they help that person out of their own pocket. All right, a small business owner will get an ask from somebody on their team. They'll know somebody's struggling, and they will just help, or they'll do a pay advance. And so our goal is to just make that process easier for employees, right? That I'll just give somebody a pay advance, or I'll give somebody some money out of my own checkbook, is really generous and wonderful. It also is highly likely to be unequally distributed, right? To Srinath's point, it's going to be the squeaky wheels that get that grease, not everybody who's suffering. And it'll be a set of one-off decisions that are personal, that are sometimes hard. It's really difficult to say no, but it opens up equity issues if you say yes, because you don't have real clear criteria. So the way that we solve for that is there are very clear criteria. There's equity across the population who might need help. And of course, it's one less thing for the employer themselves to worry about, because when somebody has a crisis, our grant managers are incredibly compassionate, and they're the ones getting on the phone with the person to say what's happened and offer a listening ear and be caring, which is a really big part of what people need when they're in that moment of crisis. So So that's what we do. I started with this. I think there's a phenomenal and exciting range of things happening in financial health for employees. I started with this because I thought it was the thing nobody else was doing. And also because I think that solving for crises is like a baseline, right? Like when people can't manage a crisis on their own, the idea of saving for the future is really hard, really, really hard. And when they, there's all of this longer term planning that we'd love to see people do, or thinking about their financial life. And it's hard to ask people to take that on when they're really not sure if they're going to be able to make rent next month. So I wanted to start with basic level of security for all. And by, one last thing I'll say about this is, one of the employers we work with, who's not a terribly large employer, talks about the idea that he doesn't have the capacity financially to raise wages across the board, but this is a way of directing some additional dollars to the people who needed them most. So it's a very efficient way, a very financially pragmatic way to solve for financial security.
I like that. Srinath, I'm coming to you in a second, but Rachel, someone has asked, how many employees do you need to have to set up a Canary fund? And if the answer is larger than you think might be everyone in the audience, you might talk about some of the ways that that there could be innovations in this answer.
Right, exactly. So don't assume we can't help you. And please, our website is workwithcanary.com. And if you're curious and want to know more, please reach out to us there. You can set up a demo. You can set up a conversation with us directly on the site. And we'd love to have that conversation. What I really would love to be doing is working with the folks on this webinar in particular to pilot and experiment with how we can best serve smaller employers, because it is possible. Absolutely. It just requires some creativity around structure to make it really easy for people to enter. And so, we would love pilot partners to help us figure that out. And so if you have, any interest at all in exploring how you could do this, please do reach out to us. And in addition to the website, I'm Rachel at workwithcanary.com. Also always super happy to talk to people.
Awesome. So Srinath, Starlight has taken a totally different approach to addressing this problem, equally innovative and yet very different. So tell us about Starlight and the offer.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tammy. And I just wanted to kind of start with saying, I think a lot of folks in this call, like, you deeply understand your workers and their day-to-day financial situation. And I think hopefully a lot of what I say is not really new to you, but it's more like a slightly different framing of how you can show up to help for them. So we help workers truly understand solutions for daily key life expenses and how they can use federal, state, and local programs that help lower the daily cost of living so they can actually improve their disposable income. Why is this important? There's about $140 billion every year that goes unused. That could help 60 million households in America. And most of us know that people are struggling. So why is this possible? Are people just forgetting about it? What's going wrong? And I think, for better or for worse, it's actually really hard to understand what you're eligible for, what benefits are out there, and how do I find out if I am the right person for it? And you've probably heard this phrase a lot when you hear people talk about encountering the government and applying for a program or a subsidy, where they're like, well, I remember I applied to this one thing a few years ago and it didn't work, so I just decided not to apply again. But the reality is, the programs are there. During COVID, most government programs got digital, got easier to access, and are now available. But people are still struggling to find what they qualified for. How do they know what's out there? And then how do they apply? So what does this mean very practically? We help understand your financial situation and then recommend to you which are the right programs that you're qualified for. It might be a utility subsidy for your heating bill in New York, where I live. It might be that there is a childcare subsidy that's in Illinois and will help you when you're trying to actually juggle going to work. And this subsidy is the difference between your ability to go to work or you have to stay at home. And it might be that for non-standard jobs, you're dealing with when and where you want to work, and you need assistance while working to make this entire sort of lifestyle work together. Now, why is this a huge deal as an essential? the reality is, and I think Rachel hit the nail on the head, there are some jobs where we don't have the margins to support giving someone everything they need. And so the social safety net is there to help you. The question is, how do you find out what you're qualified for? How do you get it? How do you like remember that, it's a two-step process and you got to like remember to follow up in a few weeks and then send the right paperwork. And if you make that easy for someone, workers are smart. They have agency, they have ownership. With the right context and information, they can go ahead, take the plunge, and guess what? When they have an extra couple $100 per month, it changes their mindset of how they approach work and their day-to-day budgeting so that they can actually show up and be fully present at work.
Love it. And so today, if I'm an employer on this call, I've heard about this resource and tool. Do I tell my employees? Do I direct my employees there? It seems that this is a way to avoid some of the shame dimensions and the need for trust that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So just in a very practical sense, I think it's very important here is that, we work with you to offer Starlight to your employees. So if you're interested in offering this to employees, come chat with us. I think, like Rachel said, we've historically worked with larger institutions, but we want to work with everyone and make sure it works for every single person. And so we want to figure out what is the right type of product that would work. We already know a lot about language sensitivity, about cell phone importance, not requiring a laptop. We've done a lot of that, but there's a lot we don't know. So we're very honest about the fact that we want to work in pilot with employers who are motivated to help their employees and bring Starlight to them. The way it would work is you as an employer have to do nothing and like bring Starlight to your employees, and then we'll communicate with them, check on what their qualification is, where they're based, where they might find benefits based on their federal, state, or local like geography that they're in, and then see what programs they can qualify for and help them actually navigate the process and get their personal assistant to help them through it.
Super helpful. So one thing that is on my mind, and I thought it was on other people's mind, and one of the questions in the chat suggested it is so how do you know that the solutions you're offering, whether it's emergency cash or it's access to a broad range of benefits, make a difference for workers and for employers? And in a more granular way, one of the audience members asks specifically what kind of impact metrics and what are you looking at and reporting on to know that these solutions are making progress? Maybe we start with you, Rachel.
Yeah, we're looking at two things. In a way, it's like, okay, take your own medicine, right? Srinath and I both started the call by saying, ask your employees what they need. We got to also ask them, did this work? Like, did it solve it? So when people we have a set of data when people are requesting emergency grants, because we know a lot about, well, why do they need the money? And then we survey people after the fact to understand what happened in their lives afterwards. And the kinds of things we say are things like, or that they say are things like, I was able to avoid being evicted. I was able to avoid downgrading my food choices. I was able to get my car fixed and I got to work, right? So we hear those responses directly from individuals. Now, the next stage of it, which we're the early part of it, is to then ask employers, what did you see? Right. So we know from the employers who we've been able to work on this data with that the individuals who received grants are staying at those employers at a higher rate than their normal turnover rates, which is incredibly important, right? Because even for a low wage employer, the data is that it costs at least $6,000 to replace somebody, right? And that doesn't take into account the like mind share and like pain in the assness of having somebody leave and what it does for the team, right? That's just recruiting costs and lost time of having the job filled. And so, we're mostly working with employers to give employees $1,500 grants. So if you could pay $1,500 to have this person pay, for the crisis and keep working versus pay $6,000 to replace them, that's also the next piece of analysis that we really want to do with folks to understand the return on investment of this particular intervention. We're at the beginning of that.
Srinath, what do you
think? Yeah, I was going to say, I think, and we've seen an average of $1,000 that people are leaving on the table per year. And that's with sort of a small subset of benefits that we started a lot of our work with, and we're expanding that all the time. So I think there's a very genuine, like a mixture of awareness and process challenges that is holding people back. And once you give them that, they love it because they're like, why would I not take support on a crucial part of my day-to-day expenses that now unlocks money for my kid, for my school, for my transportation that I need every day? So to us, it's like pretty clear that the money is available. And when we've gone through and done this with hundreds of people, we noticed that they firstly are thankful to how we got to them, which is through their employer, and say, this was a channel that now I trust a lot more because they showed up for me in a way I never thought they did. And so that trust actually builds for you. The second piece of it is once they get the unlock, they're like, oh, like what else is out? And so it almost awakens them to thinking about what are the other ways that I can improve my own financial health. And then that gives me a ton more comfort and reduces the stress level. Like what we've seen a lot with people in low wage jobs is that 50% of them, while working, are struggling with one of the other core expenses. It might be rent, it might be food, it might be transportation. And so if we can actually help people with something that's really crucial to them, that unlock accrues to them. Now, where we're going with this is we want to actually validate. And to Rachel's point, we want to make sure that employers are able to see the value of giving this to employees, whether it's through sort of rigorous testing and also through survey-based responses, both with the employees we help and the employers. We want to confirm that the value accrues to them. But in terms of the individual's benefit, to us, that's like almost like done. We've already seen that extremely at large scale. And when we get to people and give them the support they need, that makes the difference between them perceiving themselves as financially vulnerable to saying that, oh, I'm actually having a thriving life, actually improving in the direction I want.
I love that. So what I'm hearing is that you know that the individual who uses Canary benefits. The open question is, how do we name and quantify specific benefits to an employer who connects that user to all of these resources, and frankly at presumably no or low cost to the employer. Rachel, someone in the chat has asked a fairly specific question for you, but it's a good question because it means people are thinking about, ooh, how do I use this in my business? Would the cost associated in forming a nonprofit through Canary serve as a tax benefit to the business owner? So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we set this up is so that you don't have to do the work or taking on the cost of setting up a nonprofit, which can be really a lot, but you still get the tax benefit of providing an emergency grant to an individual who works for your firm, because what happens is you're donating money to a nonprofit we've already set up that is set up for all of the businesses that we work with. And so you as the business owner can donate money into that. It's a charitable contribution for you because you've just given money to a nonprofit that exists to provide emergency funds to people in crisis. And then when, if you're have an employee who has a crisis, they are then receiving funds from that nonprofit. Now, small employers generally can't do this on their own without a third-party partner because your employee base is too small to count as a charitable class. It's getting into tax law in a way that's not useful, but like if you're Walmart and you have 1.4 million employees, that's a charitable class. That's a huge number of people. And so you can set this up on your own. You also have the financial bandwidth to pay the licensing and registration fees, annual audit fees, like setting up a nonprofit, like anything else, it requires some administrative work that's not free. So that's why we're so excited at Canary to talk about how do we partner with the public-private partnership? How do we work to get this solution to small employers? Because it's really core to our mission. Spreading these costs across a bigger number of parties is really what we want to be able to accomplish.
Love it. Srinath, the same person who asked the question about the tax benefits for the employer asked about it for Starlight. I think it's probably worth explaining in some more detail how the two things are not the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, we are an embedded solution almost that we can be offered by the employer to all of the employees. We offer a white label platform, so it will be Powered by Starlight, run by Starlight, no operations costs on the employer, but delivered through you to all of your employees. The advantage here is a lot of these programs are federal, state, or local programs with their own eligibility criteria, processes, and infrastructure. So we are like a hack to guide you through the process. So we'll say, oh, Shri, like you live in New Jersey, there's a utility subsidy. The process involves 2 steps. First step is with the New Jersey Power Authority. And then the second step is with Con Edison. And we need you to go through these 2 steps. Here's the exact paperwork, documentation, and process and workflow you need to go through. And we are here to guide you through it. And then when you get through that, you unlock that money because now your utilities bill is a lot lower. And this unlock is massive. And right now, the amount of complexity that the employee has to go through while juggling their job and their household is so high that they often would never get there. So we're not really a tax benefit, we're more an employee benefit that we can offer to all of your employees as a value add to help them lower all of their key expenses.
Super helpful. So we talked about, both of you talked about how there has to be a degree of trust between the employee and the employer, and that absence of trust can be a barrier or source of resistance in helping employees solve this problem. And so thoughts on other barriers or sources of resistance that employers typically face in addressing these challenges, and how small employers might think about overcoming some of those challenges?
I think I can start with one thing that's just very honest, and I think we should chat about it, which is that I think there's always a situation where people are like, oh, why are you giving me this and not just giving me more money? So it's important to just take that on its head and say there are constraints within which all employers are operating. And so it's probably better to say, hey, this is a way to augment and support your disposable income while we can't necessarily change you from this particular pay level to a higher pay level easily at this company today. We might have systemic changes that happen, but in the short term, like here's an immediate way to give you 15 to 20% more disposable income, which is a huge difference between like stress and not stress. And you start doing it in small ways because you're almost creating a shift in what they think you can do for them. And then once you've already started, it builds the trust with like small acts and then grows into saying that, hey, I feel more trusted and giving you more information. But I think the shame and the fear around navigating government is one that if you reduce that complexity on, that gives them a lot more clarity that you can help them on that.
Anything to add, Rachel?
Yeah, I think that's so right. I just agree with everything you said. I think the other thing I think this is hard. So I want to acknowledge that. I think small business owners are expected, like they take on a lot. They're expected to do a lot with limited resources, limited time. And part of what you see this show up in some of the questions in the chat, in the webinar here around like, there aren't always providers that are geared for your needs. It's really challenging to figure out which providers are high quality and which aren't. And yet the reality is that you as the employer are the most important input into one or two most important inputs into the financial well-being of your employees. Like the most important thing in anybody's financial life is their job, is how their income is structured when it comes in, and the infrastructure you have at your disposal in terms of being in regular communication with your people, being a community where people talk to each other and share information. Those are such valuable assets. And so, it's not like, and I feel like both what Srinath at Starlight is doing and what we're trying to do at Canary is really trying to figure out, okay, how can we cost effectively help you make use of that asset? The fact that you are a communication hub. And that makes you like really well positioned to help people with their financial well-being. And then the other thought, like kind of unrelated around that, or maybe it's related, is that 92% of employees surveyed would like more assistance from their employee about their financial health. That wasn't 92% of people saying, I want you to pay me more. That's a different survey. This is the survey of if my employer were going to offer me information, advice, resources, I would like that. And so, I think that's really pretty great that people start in that place.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add one thing there, which is, I think the fact that people are willing and engaged and ready to receive from you is great, but you also are stretched for time. So I think what is interesting is how can you augment your existing lack of bandwidth, but still do more? And so part of that's where things like Canary and Starlight can help you amplify your impact and your communication, but like it doesn't create 6 more to-dos on your weekly tasks.
I love that. I think all of us want our weekly task list to not be expanded, but our impact to be increased. I am mindful that we are at the end of our time. Before we close out, what do you most want the employers in the audience to take away? Start with you, Rachel.
Oh, I feel like we've covered so much ground. I hope you're leaving here with a sense of hope. Like you have a lot of options and a lot of opportunity to be really helpful for your staff. And you're already in a place where you've provided jobs for a significant number of people. It's a massive accomplishment to run a small business. Massive. And like I am now a small business owner myself. Srinath is, I assume, as well. Like I have so much empathy and compassion for how hard that is now. And yeah, it's really impressive. You've taken it on. Congratulations.
You get the last word,
Yeah.
Srinath.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I just have so much respect for that early stage, and I think Rachel and me like probably feel the same. It's like you encounter it, realize the amount of breadth of things you have to deal with, and at the same time, you're sitting on this call thinking about how to serve the people reporting to you and working for you and
Yeah.
helping you. And so that ability to have these two hats of your own struggles and serving everyone else is massive. And so one thing I would say is just remember there's a lot of resources out there, and some of it's about you're just the navigator. You don't have to be the source of all the answers.
Love that. This was so valuable and informative. I think we often miss the important dimension of what you all described, which is there are lots of ways for an employer to help the people that they employ without straight up increasing wages when that is not a reality. I want to thank you both for joining us, and as importantly, thank you for the work that you all do to innovate around helping employees and employers. We know that it is relatively early days for your solutions, and that there is much, much more to learn, as we've talked about the small employer context in particular. As we previewed a little bit before, we're planning pilots for small employers with each of these solutions. And so there will be opportunities in the coming weeks for employers who are interested to engage, to dive deeper, and to learn more. We will be sending follow-ups from these calls, from this meeting, with the resources that you saw and heard on the screen, as well as a recording. There will also be opportunities for you all to opt into focus groups and to help us define what a Canary pilot might look like. And of course, we have some ideas about what a Starlight pilot might look like. So watch your email. And until then, please join me in thanking both Srinath and Rachel for this rich conversation. So with that, Kelly described the Good Jobs Toolkit from the Department of Commerce that was created in partnership with the Department of Labor. On your screen, you can see some resources. As I said, we will distribute both the slides and the links to all participants after this call. For those of you that are super eager to access it right now, the URL for the toolkit is www.commerce.gov/WorkUS Job Quality Toolkit. Just search Department of Commerce Job Quality Toolkit. You can also learn more about the work that Reimagine Main Street is doing by visiting us at www.reimaginemainstreet.org. Click on the Good Jobs tabs. Rachel, Srinath, I'm going to ask you each to share your respective URLs one more time, even though we will be distributing them post.
Yeah, absolutely. Ours is www.workwithcanary.com. And I'm Rachel at workwithcanary.com.
And we are www.get-starlight.com. And my email is just Sreenath, my first name, FHREENATH @get-starlight.com.
With that, thank you again, Rachel and Sreenath. The QR codes on the screen right now can allow you to capture easily the Good Jobs Toolkit or the Reimagine Main Street content, and we will be in touch. I super appreciate the active Q&A, and in particular, the feedback to Rachel and Sreenath about how valuable this conversation was. Thank you all, and with that, the webinar is over.